Who is the most morally good character in Soulsborne and Elden Ring? This is a thought-provoking question that has led me to revisit each of FromSoftware's games in order to find an answer. It also acts as an interesting companion piece to the Most Evil video that I did a few weeks ago. FromSoftware are masters at world building, and as a result, their game worlds are full of fascinating characters. Some are morally grey, some are completely despicable, and some are kind, self-sacrificing, and brave. In today's video, we will be looking at the latter, examining each of the mainline Soulsborne games in order to highlight examples of those who do good. Heroes, courageous warriors, noble kings, and empathetic individuals who set an example of what it means to be good. In terms of this video's structure, I will choose a character who will serve as a nominee from each of the mainline Souls-like games, meaning we will cover Demon's Souls, each of the Dark Souls games, Bloodborne and Elden Ring. Then in the final chapter, I will choose one of these characters, who will take the coveted title of Most Good Character. This is a little bit different from my usual long-form lore content, but I thought it was a really interesting subject that everyone will have different opinions on, so be sure to let me know yours in the comments below. Part of being a great hero is looking the part. The Ivory King knows this, and yet in-game we need to grind 50 Loy Souls in order to get his drip. Thankfully, in the real world, no such grind is required, thanks to Orochi, a streetwear brand that reimagines our favourite titles, including Dark Souls, Skyrim, and of course, Elden Ring. My entire personality is based on the Souls games, and so I am really glad to partner with Orochi, as now my style can reflect my love for the Souls series. As someone who owns a lot of Orochi's products, I can attest to the fact they are comfy, well made, and beautifully designed. One of my personal favourites is this Sacred Spear hoodie, which I've owned since last year and I barely take off. The quality is premium, it is genuinely my favourite piece of apparel, and it allows me to showcase my love for this awesome character and look good while doing it. Better yet is the community-driven aspect to the company, as they have an active Discord where a lot of the design ideas actually come from. If you've been looking to upgrade your Souls fashion, then you are in luck. This is the best time to upgrade your wardrobe, as Orochi are currently running their biggest sale ever, since they launched. From the 24th to the 28th of November, you can get up to 40% off their products using my link. An amazing chance to grab the awesome Mogwin Spear hoodie or anything else that catches your eye. Thank you to Orochi for sponsoring this video, and with that said, let us look at my first most good character from Demon's Souls. The demons of Demon's Souls are beings who take various different forms, with the demons often reflecting the myths of the lands they are found in. In some cases, demons are created by other powerful demons, and in some even rarer cases, a human can be granted a demon soul. This is the case for King Allant, and the player character should they choose the bad ending. It is also the case for Maiden Astraea, who is my nominee from Demon's Souls. It certainly says a lot about the nuance of the game story that I have chosen a demon as my most good character. To understand why Maiden Astraea is good, we need to unpack the reasons why she became a demon. We know that Astraea is a member of the Church of God, as Saint Urbain himself is aware of her and her journey into the valley.
Ah, Astraea of the Valley of Defilement? I'm not sure, but Saint Astraea of the West was accompanied by the knight Garl Vinland.
She also appears to be of noble blood, as is hinted at by the name of her soul, the pure blood demon's soul. From this soul, you can make the blue blood sword. Again, blue blood being a term for someone from aristocratic stock. Yet despite her noble upbringing, she has chosen service over a comfortable life, illustrated by the fact she will venture into the deadly valley of defilement. Maiden Astraea is clearly a monumental figure within the church, as the Miracle Resurrection refers to her as the Sixth Saint, putting her on at least equal footing with Saint Urbain. The filthy woman, a merchant found in the Valley of Defilement, doesn't speak too charitably about the maiden, suggesting that when Astraea arrived here, she looked down her nose at the woman and her son. albeit this woman clearly has a chip on her shoulder, and it was more likely that Astraea was shocked at the living conditions here, rather than judgmental about it. I think Astraea's pure intentions can be corroborated by the company she keeps, Jarl Vinland, an honourable and well-respected knight who continues to serve the maiden even after she becomes a demon. Saint Urbain even professes doubt over Astraea becoming a demon, because of Jarl Vinland.
I'm not sure, but Saint Astraea of the West was accompanied by the knight Jarl Vinland. She would never turn to evil with that upstanding knight to guide her. Surely it is mere slander. Sadly, the weak are prone to such backstabbing.
Jarl's reputation as an honourable and decent person is further emphasised by his sister, who again risks her own life to come to the valley to save her younger brother. Jarl doesn't become a demon, he is still who he has always been, and despite that, he has still chosen to stand by Astraea even as she becomes a demon. I believe that Jarl would not have stayed loyal to her, had she not continued with a noble purpose. Astraea seems to share a lot of her motivation for her actions in her dialogue during our fight with her bodyguard. She is here to provide comfort and sanctuary for those who have been afflicted in the Valley of Defilement, and she has taken on a demon soul in order to do precisely that. You see, the suffering of those in the valley is almost unimaginable. Those who find themselves here are the most hopeless and desperate people. Her dialogue also suggests that she is doing this because she believes God has abandoned them, specifically those who suffer in the valley. As such, it makes sense that she has renounced God and turned to the Old One for help, seeking to do something active to alleviate the pain of others. Jarl Vinland stands with her because he clearly agrees with her judgment that no merciful God worth serving would let this level of suffering happen. The Archstone description for the Dirty Colossus reads the following: "In a swamp infested by poisonous and vile creatures lies a filth-encrusted valley. The poor journey to this rotten place to offer their souls so that they might be freed from their suffering. Maiden Astraea clearly witnessed this suffering and was appalled, and thus accepted a demon soul in order to use its power to help the valley's inhabitants. This becomes further evident when we examine some of the things one can use her soul to create. Firstly, there is the spell known as Relief, which reads the following: Though Astraea is the most impure demon of all, her works are equal to those of divine beings. So a couple of things here. Firstly, it speaks of how powerful she now is as a demon, with her powers being equal to divine beings. The effect of the spell itself is likely akin to the powers she used as a demon, a spell which healed people. She became a demon to leverage powers just like this. However, the spell also names her as the most impure demon of all, which many could take to be a condemnation of her character. However, when we look at another spell made from her soul, the spell Deathcloud, we realise that this isn't the case. Deathcloud reads as follows: It is natural that those who take in all that is impure are themselves the most impure of all. So it seems as though the impurity is literal, that she has taken in a lot of the rot and suffering of those in the valley, in order to give them some relief. The Deathcloud spell is likely the weaponized dispelling of such impurity. Again, the spells made from her soul paint a clear picture. She used the power of a demon soul in order to use it to help the people here. This is reinforced by the description of her Archstone, which reads as follows: Once a sixth saint, Astraea lived with those awaiting death in the Valley of Defilement. She pledged herself to a demon's soul rather than a cruel god to ease the pain of the people there. Astraea is sincere in her acts. She genuinely became a demon in order to help those who were suffering here. She renounced her connection to the church and God, seeing that both had done very little for the people of the valley, and she took direct action. In return, the people of the valley became extremely loyal to her, worshipping her even. And again, this is something we learn from the first Archstone, which reads: Overtaken by poison and plague, the dwellers attack anyone who wanders into the valley, hoping to offer souls to the woman who showed compassion. Astraea is straightforwardly a good person, someone who gave up the comforts that her aristocratic background would have given her, to instead live in the worst squalor imaginable. She sacrificed a lot to try and help these people, and she is an example of how one could harness the power of a demon soul to do good. In a few ways, I find there to be quite a lot of similarity between Astraea and my nominee from Dark Souls, who is the Fair Lady, Quelaag's sister. We meet the Fair Lady after we have defeated Quelaag, and yet we are unable to communicate with her, as she seemingly does not speak the human language. But when wearing the Old Witch's ring, we are able to understand her, and through this we learn a number of things. The first thing that will strike you about this character is how kind she is, despite being in immense pain. She's always wanting to make sure that her sister is safe. She constantly downplays her own issues, and in general just comes across as a gentle, empathetic soul. But she believes we are Quelaag, who she names as her sister, and this itself tells us a couple of things about her. Firstly, the fact she mistakes us for Quelaag shows that she is blind, and this is a result of the great sacrifice she has made for others, which we will talk about later. Her blindness is reaffirmed when she states that she cannot see Quelaag's face, but she still remembers it. But it also tells us that she is the sister of Chaos Witch Quelaag, meaning that both of these characters are the daughters of the famed Witch of Izalith, one of the original lords. This means that the Fair Maiden is likely one of the cloaked women that we see in the opening cinematic of the game, yet she and Quelaag are much transformed from their original humanoid form. We do learn a little of this transformation from Quelaag's Fury Sword, which reads as follows: "A curved sword born from the soul of Quelaag, daughter of the Witch of Izalith, who was transformed into a chaos demon." Quelaag and the Fair Maiden were clearly caught in the cataclysm that resulted in the birth of the Bed of Chaos. We learn of this event via the Bed of Chaos Lord Soul, which reads as follows: "The Witch of Izalith attempted to duplicate the first flame from a soul, but instead created a distorted being of chaos and fire. Its power formed a bed of life, which would become the source of all demons, and is more than enough to satiate the Lord Vessel. The Witch of Izalith attempted to make her own version of the first flame, but the ritual went awry, and from her was born the Bed of Chaos, the seedbed of demonkind. It is clear that the witch herself has become the Bed of Chaos, given it drops her Lord Soul, and we do meet some of her other daughters. Quilana, the mother of pyromancy who has fled Izalith, and another daughter who guards the Bed of Chaos. These daughters have retained their normal forms, so Quelaag and the Fair Lady must have been in close proximity to the Bed of Chaos when the transformation occurred, undergoing half-transformations into demons. The area we fight Quelaag in is her new domain, meaning that she and her sister came here following the fall of Izalith, and set up shop. Since coming here, the Fair Lady has overseen the Chaos Servant Covenant, and seemingly began to lay eggs. We can learn a little about these eggs from her Firekeeper's soul, which reads as follows: "A Firekeeper's soul is a draw for humanity, and held within their bosoms, below just a thin layer of skin, are swarms of humanity that writhe and squirm. To her, the countless eggs which appeared were cradles for each tiny humanity." So some interesting information there. We learn that the Fair Lady is one of the Firekeepers, an all-female class who assist in keeping the bonfires lit. This isn't hugely surprising, given that her faction, the Chaos Servants, would likely be invested in keeping the Age of Fire going. Nito, the Witch, and Gwyn's family, none of these would benefit from the Age of Dark, but as the soul's description states, every Firekeeper is essentially a draw for humanity, and thus it makes sense that the eggs she lays would have been containers for all the humanity that is being fed to her bonfire. Yet she is concerned about these eggs. She expresses distress to us, telling us that she believes that the eggs have become still, that they are dead. This is because of a great sacrifice the fair maiden made in order to help others. To understand this sacrifice, we need to examine the lore of her most loyal servant, Engi. This man was once a pyromancer, something we learn via the item description of Toxic Mist. It reads as follows: unique pyromancy crafted by Engi, considered a heretic even at the Great Swamp. Create intense poison mist. Why was Engi driven from the Great Swamp? One only need cast this pyromancy, a perverse diversion from the art of fire, to find out. So Engi was a pyromancer who developed derivative pyromancies that focused on spreading poison instead of fire. It kind of makes sense that he would now be serving the Fair Maiden, given she is one of the Daughters of Chaos, and he has been ostracized by his own community. Yet it goes further than that, and this is something we learn from him directly. He says the following:
"Worse than undead, we are diseased and unwanted, like the grime of the great swamp. But my dear fair lady, she cried for me and swallowed the great blight pus, despite Mistress Quellag's orders to the contrary."
The fair lady saw the suffering of Engi and was moved by it, so much so that she drew the toxins out of his body and into her own, similar to Maiden Estraya, who took the impurities of the valley denizens into her own body. The fair lady takes on someone else's burden so that they may find relief, and she seemingly has suffered greatly for this decision, with this blight pus wreaking havoc upon her body. She constantly reassures Quelag that she isn't in too much pain, and yet it is clear that this is a lie to make her sister feel better. Her lower body seems crippled, barely able to move, and it is likely she couldn't walk even if she wanted to. As we mentioned, she is completely blind, meaning she cannot even take comfort in the countenance of her dear sister. Additionally, it seems as though this blight pus has killed her eggs, and thus we can make sense of why those who hold a covenant with her offer humanity. Earlier we noted how these eggs once contained humanity, and thus offering humanity to her could perhaps help soothe her pain or rejuvenate her eggs. And yet for all this horrific suffering, the fair lady cares more about how her sister is doing, finishing most of her dialogues by asking her sister to stay safe.
"Quayla, please, sister, do not cry. I am happy, really. I have you, don't I?"
She downplays the immense pain she is in, and instead is only thinking about others. No wonder Engi is so exceptionally loyal to her. He can see firsthand how much she has suffered for him. He and the other egg bearers now carry their eggs upon their bodies, a surrogate nest that can breathe life back into these dying eggs. She also inspires loyalty in the likes of Kirk, the infamous Dark Wraith, who has become a Dark Wraith not because he believes in the cause of Kath, but because he wants to use the art of life drain in order to pillage more humanity for his true master, the Fair Lady. This was confirmed in a DesignWorks interview, and is confirmed in-game by Kirk's body eventually turning up in the Fair Lady's chamber. Overall, the Fair Lady is a great example of self-sacrifice and empathy, a kind character who really stands out in the decrepit world of Lordran. While the Fair Lady is a good representative of the Izalith faction, our next character is one that is dedicated to the containment of what her mother unleashed. My nominee for Dark Souls 2 is the Ivory King, the great leader who made immense sacrifices to hold back the spread of the old chaos. In Dark Souls 2, we seek to break the cycle of the undead curse, and in so doing we are drawn to the lands of Drangleic, the lands where powerful souls linger. These powerful souls will give us the strength to become the next monarch, and perhaps the answer we seek. In the course of our journey we come to the Undead Crypt, and we find the hollowed out King Vendrick, the once great king who founded Drangleic. Using the power of the Ashen Mist Heart, we are able to travel back in time and speak to Vendrick, and in conversation with him, he offers his advice.
Prove your worth. Find the ancient crowns. Seek adversity, and they will be yours. And your wishes granted.
He tells us that we should seek the ancient crowns of past kings in order to prove ourselves worthy of sitting the throne. These 3 crowns are that of the Sunken, Iron and Ivory King, all once great monarchs who fell to ruin over time. These 3 DLCs aren't just about claiming a physical crown, it is a journey of learning. For us to be a true monarch, we have to understand why the great rulers of the past fell and learn from their stories. My nominee for the most good character in Dark Souls 2 is one of these past kings, the Ivory King of Eleum Lois. The Ivory King is a moral exemplar, an ideal of what a king and a leader should be, self-sacrificing, kind and brave. And by reading his soul alone, you get a good idea of what kind of a king he was. It reads as follows: Soul of the Ivory King of Eleum Lois. The proud Ivory King was ever merciful, and devoted himself to the protection of his great land, until he was devoured by the flames of chaos. This king was merciful and devoted his rule to the protection of his people and his lands. He was not a corrupt ruler who sought power for the sake of it. He used his power to protect people, and in the end he would sacrifice himself to further protect his subjects. When we enter the domain of the Ivory King, we are issued a warning by Alsana, Oracle of the King, who wants us to keep away from this dead city. She tells us that the old chaos still hungers. These lands are dangerous for the unprepared. We soon learn the truth of this city, that it was built here for a specific reason, to contain the hungering old chaos that sits beneath it. Alsana tells us as such.
My dear lord, a most true king. It was with his magnificent soul that he built Eleum Lois and contained the spread of chaos. But the chaos would not be sated, and the king gave his own soul.
This old chaos is almost certainly the chaos of the Witch of Izalith, a force which clearly is still in existence by the time of Dark Souls 2. And we can see some of the similar aesthetics at play here in the old chaos, and thus our assumption is that this is the chaos, having advanced significantly since we last saw it, growing from a single bed to an endless expanse of lava and branches. Presumably the only reason we don't encounter demons is because of the Ivory King's efforts to suppress the old chaos. We saw a similar conflict during the time of Gwyn, in which he and his Silver Knights ventured to Izalith to make war on the demons. In a mirror of those events, the Ivory King also led his Silver Knights to war with chaos, much like Gwyn and his knights once did. As Alsana mentioned, the king built this city directly on top of the old chaos, directly as an attempt to seal it. Everything we witness in this city is part of the mechanism meant to contain this powerful threat. Eleum Lois's basic soldiers are seemingly sorcerers, something we can learn from their ice rapiers, presumably recruited for their command over ice magic, which would be useful in containing the chaos. Alongside these skilled warriors are the Rampart Golems, hulking warriors who, judging by the term golem, are not actually living beings. Interestingly, the Ivory King also seems to have possessed a number of facsimile giants, the soul-powered golems that Vendrick developed. Given that these creations were specifically accredited to Vendrick following his defeat of the giants, I wonder if these are meant to indicate a relationship between Drangleic and Eleum Lois. However the Ivory King came to possess these golems, these are powerful tools, and again show how much of a concerted effort was organised by the Ivory King in order to seal the old chaos. The Ivory King also had fearsome saber cat-like beasts, who essentially act as guard dogs, Ava, Lud, and Zalin. Going by Lud's soul, each of these beasts had a specific role, and there were apparently 7 of them at one point. There is of course the impressive walls of the city themselves, which are not used to keep invaders out. Rather, they are used to keep the old chaos in. An entire priesthood also seems to have been established here, in an attempt to further contain the old chaos that lay below it. The retainer enemies we find around Ilium Lois were those who served these priestesses, and the Eye of the Priestess once belonged to those who held this title. This eye, according to its description, was one that each priestess used to replace one of their natural eyes. It is an eye that reveals the hidden things of Ilium Lois, including the shrouded knights and Ava, suggesting that the priestess had a role in shrouding these beings, and organising the defences of the city. As an aside, it seems as though this was also Alsana's role within this society. We know this thanks to the translation work of Loki. In one of his articles, which I will link below, he states that the term oracle is actually the same word used for priestess in the original kanji. In short, the priestess has played a vital role in keeping the old chaos suppressed, much as Alsana is still doing. Finally, we have the frozen nature of the city itself, a state that seems to be maintained by Alsana, though I imagine she was at one point assisted by the sorcerers of the city as well. Of course, for a force that is primarily focused around heat and lava, having a frozen city sit atop it would be the perfect way to restrain its power. All of this to say that the Ivory King essentially put all of his efforts into holding back this dangerous force. His entire rule wasn't for glory or for power, rather it was a duty. A duty that he and his retainers undertook with the utmost courage and diligence. Yet while he commanded significant military forces, the Ivory King wasn't someone to lead from the back. According to Alsana, the king eventually had to make the ultimate sacrifice. Seeing that the old chaos would not be satiated, he fed his own powerful soul to the chaos, condemning himself to a tortured existence just to hold back its power a bit longer. Again, this is a mirror to Gwyn's self-sacrifice, where he fed himself to the first flame in order to perpetuate the Age of Light. But Gwyn did this out of fear and for the selfish goal of maintaining his own dynasty. The Ivory King has no such motivations. He does so to protect the greater world from the old chaos' destructive power. And he doesn't just die, he is corrupted and taken over by the chaos, meaning he is offering himself up to a horrific existence just to hold back its power. It is easy to see such leadership as inspiring, and it is why so many of his loyal knights also follow him to a similar fate, also offering their souls in a similar manner. This shows us what kind of a man and leader the Ivory King was, someone whose entire rule was dedicated to service, and who offered his own life in order to stem the tide. And I think his moral character is also well highlighted by Alsana. She is so inspired by her lord that she has remained here ever since to continue her vigil, in accordance with his last wishes. She also tells us who she is, that she is a sister to Nashandra, and one of the fragments of Manus.
I saw that the king of this land was strong. I sought him only to sustain myself, to smother my fears. Now, I realize that he may have known all along. I was born of fear, and my lord provided comfort.
She is the manifestation of her father's fears, and she sought out the Ivory King because of his strength, finding shelter in his power. Yet she believes the Ivory King always knew what she was, and her reasons for seeking him out. Yet he didn't care. He offered her the shelter she desired regardless. He was empathetic to her fears, despite her nature and the original selfish reasons she had for joining with him. It is the strength of his character and moral fibre that has thus inspired Alsana. She is fighting against her own fearful nature to maintain her watch. She is not fleeing or succumbing to her fear. She is fighting for her lord's mission because he commanded such respect and fealty. I don't think much more needs said. As I intimated at the beginning of this chapter, the Ivory King is the perfect ideal for a leader. He is strong, brave, empathetic, and self-sacrificing. Someone who rules not for power, but as a service to his people. We do a good thing when we defeat him. We are freeing him from his tortured existence, putting him to rest, and bringing his sacrifice to an end. My nominee for Dark Souls 3 is Yorm the Giant, Lord of Cinder and ruler of the profaned capital. I came to this conclusion because, like the Ivory King, Yorm comes across as a fairly selfless ruler with strong morals. The most logical point to start with his lore is his soul, which reads as follows. Yorm is the descendant of an ancient conqueror, but was asked by the very people once subjugated to lead them, serving as both a weighty blade and a stone-hard shield. We get further information about his role as a leader from his cinders, which read, Lonely Yorm became a Lord of Cinder, to put the profaned flame to rest, knowing full well that those who spoke of him as Lord were quite insincere. So quite a lot of information to unpack here. Firstly, we learn that he was not from the profaned capital originally. In fact, he was once an enemy of theirs, who was invited to rule over them out of necessity. As to which conqueror he is descended from, we are never given an overt answer, but we may be tempted to assume he is descended from the giants of Dark Souls 2. However, Yorm's face is very human, whereas the giants of the second game all had holes in their faces. Quite a stark difference that rules out any possible relation. I think the best suggestion I have seen comes from Loki, in his article on the profaned capital, where he suggests that he could have been descended from Wolnir, who indeed was a conqueror from the neighbouring lands of Karthus. Loki argues that Yorm turned traitor on Wolnir, and instead decided to side with the people of the profaned capital, to protect them from any further incursions into their territory. This really is a terrific article, and I will link it below. The profaned flame of the capital is a huge subject in of itself, and instead I will be focusing on his time as a ruler, rather than the profaned flame of the capital. If you do want to learn more about it, I would once again refer you to Loki's excellent article on the matter. Yorm's cinders tell us a lot about his character, namely that he was aware that those who had elected him as their lord were not actually too fond of him, that their fealty towards him was insincere. For those of the profaned capital, Yorm being their leader was clearly an alliance of convenience. Yorm is clearly a powerful warrior, and so having such a man to defend them is a massive boon. We get additional information about Yorm's character from his Great Shield, which reads the following. As a lord, Yorm risked everything and fought unflinchingly as a one-man vanguard. Following the loss of the one he wished to protect, he forsook his shield. This shows that Yorm was an empathetic soul, who was once so deeply affected by the loss of someone he cared for, that he abandoned his more balanced fighting style for a more aggressive one. Despite the fact that Yorm knows the humans he rules over do not actually respect him, he continues to serve as their leader, regardless of their opinion of him. He defends people that don't actually like him, and he overlooks any pride or ego to do his duty as a leader. And we actually get further evidence that Yorm still tried to win his subjects over, despite their disdain for him. We learn this via the description of the Storm Ruler's sword, which reads as follows. Great sword with a broken blade, also known as the Giant Slayer for the residual strength of storm that brings giants to their knees. Yorm the Giant once held 2 of these, but gave one to the humans that doubted him, and left the other to a dear friend before facing his fate as a Lord of Cinder. So here we learn a fair amount about Yorm's acts. Firstly, that he gave away these prized possessions to the humans who doubted him. There is a significance to this, because this sword is a weapon that could be used to kill Yorm himself. It's a gesture of trust. He is giving his doubtful subjects the means to kill him as a sort of insurance policy. Again, it just shows how he was a ruler who just wanted to do his duty and win over the trust over those he ruled. Additionally, this item description tells us that he left the second of these swords to his friend, and we later learn that this friend was Sigward of Katarina. Sigward himself is a good man, a jovial warrior who is only too happy to fight alongside us in our journey, and even share a drink with us. I think you can tell the quality of a person by the company they keep, and the fact that Sigward was such a loyal friend to Yorm tells you a lot about the type of person Yorm was. A good one. Yet there are some flaws in Yorm, ones that would certainly call in to question my nomination, so let us acknowledge them now. It is clear that Yorm's protection allowed the capital to enjoy a lot of prosperity, as is evident by the large amount of treasure that one can see in the profaned capital. Loki argues that it was in this period of prosperity that the capital became the corrupt place we see when we visit it. They would develop the dangerous and dark profaned flame. Their people would become cruel and decadent. This is no better evidence than by the jailers, the once handmaidens of the capital, who now serve Pontiff Sullivan. Both the jailers and the handmaidens are people who take joy in hurting people, a condemnation of the culture that Yorm fostered under his rule. Yet, as we noted earlier, he clearly lost someone close to him, and I believe that he was driven to such grief and anger that he became a bit of a distant ruler. Everything else we know about him suggests that he would not share the same depravity of the capital residents. Rather, I believe he allowed this society to develop as poorly as it did because of his neglect, rather than him encouraging it. So while he fails in part as a leader, I still believe that he is a morally good person overall, and this is further illustrated by his sacrifice in becoming a Lord of Cinder. The Storm Ruler's sword tells us that Yorm willingly faced his fate as a Lord of Cinder. He passed Storm Ruler to Sigward, and marched towards the First Flame. Becoming a Lord of Cinder is not exactly an honour. You essentially sacrifice yourself in order to keep the flame lit, and Yorm made this sacrifice willingly. Returning to the item description of his cinders, we can see that he did this in order to put the profaned flame to rest. He had allowed the flame to develop due to his neglect as a ruler, and it grew into a destructive force. It seems that by becoming a Lord of Cinder, he hoped to correct that mistake, and put this dark force to rest. Unfortunately, it was all for naught, as the profaned flame would destroy the capital regardless, after Yorm became a Lord of Cinder. The profaned flame pyromancy tells us as such, as it reads as follows. The profaned capital was consumed by fire after Yorm, the giant, became a Lord of Cinder. The fire, born of the sky, is said to have incinerated naught but human flesh. I believe that Yorm gave his sword to Sigward as insurance, in case Yorm, after becoming a Lord of Cinder, would forget his duty.
Home of Yorm, the reclusive giant lord. That reminds me, I've a grave promise to keep.
Sigward speaks of keeping a promise to an old friend, implying that Yorm made Sigward promise to come and put him down, should he choose to flee his duty as a Lord of Cinder. As we see in the case of Gwyn, one can lose themselves after sacrificing themselves to the flame, and I think Yorm knew this. So when we face Yorm in game, he isn't himself and has fled his duty, yet he already had his insurance policy in place, his old friend Sigward. Right until the end, Yorm wanted to make sure that he would complete his duty as a lord and a leader, and so when we put him down and claim his cinders, it is what he would have wanted. Overall, Yorm is just a good, brave leader who had his flaws, but showed courage right up until the end. The world of Yharnam is an especially cruel one, even in comparison to some of the other of FromSoftware's games. Yet despite that, we find a few examples of kindness, empathy, and good that highlight the positives of humanity, even when the world may be collapsing around them. My nominee is someone I see as one of the main examples of earnest good that we see in Yharnam. That is the Udin Chapel Dweller. This strange individual might seem to be unusual at first, or even suspicious, but the events of the game show that he is sincere in his desire to help people. We first meet him when we come to Udin Chapel. he tells us that the area is safe from beasts because it has an incense that seemingly wards them off. He then asks us that if we find anyone sane who needs help, then we should send them his way, offering the chapel as a safe haven. And while he does seem a little unusual, this is true, as the chapel is one of the few safe locations in the entire city. I think it is likely he is a chapel attendant, given he drops the formless Uden rune when killed. If that's the case, then he is voluntarily opening up his place of worship to be a safe haven for the people of the city. And he seems to do this for no other reason than he cares, and he wants people to be safe. In his concept art, he is even referred to as the Chapel Samaritan, with Samaritan having biblical connotations, and is used to designate someone who helps people for no gain. Rather, they just do it because it is right and good. His care for the people can be seen if we do decide to kill someone in the chapel, at which point he will become very distressed and refuse to talk to us. Additionally, when there is no one else to rescue, he expresses sadness that there is no one else who can be saved.
There ain't a peep to be heard, not in the old town. I doubt there's any more out there. God save us. Yarnum's done for.
Thanks to this kind individual, we are able to build a good community of survivors, and the chapel is one of the only welcoming places in the city, thanks to his hospitality. In many ways, it is very fitting that the chapel dweller is my nominee, because in my most evil video, I chose fake Yosefka, the other person who offers sanctuary, but instead she exploits the vulnerable people who come to her for help. A bit of a straightforward one that I don't think I need to say more on, just a kind and good person who offers sanctuary to those who need it most, for no ulterior motive beyond just wanting to do the right thing. Elden Ring has such a large cast of characters that I did find it difficult to even narrow down some nominees. Additionally, there are characters who may have noble or good intentions, but who commit dubious acts in order to achieve those ends. I had considered choosing Mikola for this segment, mainly because I feel he has been unfairly maligned in some ways, and that his vision and intent for the world was overall a good one. However, for me, there is one character who stands above the rest in terms of their moral fibre, and who hasn't crossed any lines in order to achieve their goals. My nominee for Elden Ring is Loretta, a noble knight who risked everything to try and find a home for an oppressed people, the Albinaurics. We face Loretta at the Halig Tree eventually, but we learn that prior to this, she was a knight of Caria. We learn this from her armour set, the description of which reads as follows: Silver armour of Loretta, a knight who served Mikola's Halig Tree. Loretta was once a royal Carian knight, and her lapis lazuli blue cape is the emblem of the knightly pride that continues to guide her. Her armour is very much in line with the other Knights of Caria that we encounter, and this is why we face a phantom version of her at Caria Manor. I have theorised in the past that this blue phantom is a version conjured by Ranni to help defend her home, in the absence of the true Loretta. However, the reason that she no longer serves Caria, and has instead defected to Mikola, is because of her quest to find a safe haven for the Albinaurics. We learn this in numerous item descriptions, such as in that of her helm, which reads as follows: Loretta, once a royal Carian knight, went on a journey in search of a haven for Albinaurics, and determined that the Halig Tree was their best chance for eventual salvation. And we get further evidence of how grueling this journey was through the spell, Loretta's Mastery. Its description reads as follows: Developed by Loretta after her long, bloody journey to seek out a place where the Albinaurics could live in peace. Loretta's undertaking was grueling, bloody, and likely took years, in which she would face numerous enemies and dangers. As a renowned Albinauric sympathiser, I have discussed the plight of my favourite silver buddies numerous times, but for the sake of any new viewers, let us do so once more. Albinaurics are artificial beings, and we know this thanks to the greatest lore item in the game. the Albinoric Bloodclot. Its item description reads as follows: Albinorics are life forms made by human hands. Thus many believe them to live impure lives, untouched by the Erdtree's grace. As for who created these beings, most of the evidence seems to point to the Nox, which would make sense given the Nox are beings associated with silver, rather than gold, and they have a taste for dabbling in artificial life. As the Bloodclot states, Albinorics are hated because they are artificial, mainly because it means they are not part of the Erdtree's cycle of life and death, and thus are impure. This explains why we see the Albinorics persecuted and exploited throughout the game, and the lands of Caria and Liurnia are especially dangerous for the Albinorics. Indeed, the description of the Albinoric shield emphasizes that the main enemy of the Albinorics were sorcerers. In part, this seems to be because of the Cuckoo Knights, the warriors employed by Raya Lucaria as their armed forces. We learn of their hatred for the Albinorics via the Albinoric pot, which reads as follows: Craftable item prepared using a ritual pot, enchanted by sorceries of the Cuckoos. The Knights of the Cuckoos do declare, Behold thy defiled blood, unlike any humour that flows in our grand realm. Just as an aside, the effect of this pot is to stifle the use of crimson flasks, a flask that is powered by the Erdtree, again reinforcing their antithetical relationship to the Erdtree. So the Albinorics tried to eke out a life in Liurnia, and yet they were hunted by the Cuckoos, abducted by Rykard, and ultimately slaughtered by Gideon Ofnir. So no wonder they needed a new land to call their own, a place where they could live, away from the influence of the Erdtree, given the Erdtree authorities would always view them with disdain. We know that Loretta finally discovers the lands of the Haligtree, which also encompasses the consecrated snowfield. These are Miquella's lands, Miquella who offers sanctuary to the meek and persecuted. This is why we also find the Misbegotten here, and in the DLC we get confirmation that the Misbegotten here have become servants of Miquella, given a Leonine Misbegotten wields Miquella's incantations. The Misbegotten were also a race that were poorly treated by the Erdtree Order, and so it isn't surprising that they also have fled the lands of the Erdtree. Likewise, this is where we find a large contingent of the Albinorics, who also wield Miquella's incantations, and even have taken on a slightly golden hue, no doubt due to unalloyed gold. My interpretation is that Loretta has chosen to serve Miquella due to Miquella's offer to shelter the Albinorics. His compassion won her loyalty, essentially. Under Miquella's aegis, the Albinorics are able to build a new future, and through Latena's quest, we can even see that there is a chance for them to reproduce. A bright future indeed, and one that Loretta forged by finding these lands and brokering a deal with Miquella. Indeed, these lands have almost become mythological to those Albinorics found in the lands between. They are promised lands that give them hope through all the suffering that they endure. And it is thanks to Loretta that the Albinorics even have this recourse. Loretta was a knight to the royal family of Liurnia, yet she decided to give up such a prestigious position in order to help an entire race of beings, and she suffered a lot to do it. A truly heroic act of sacrifice worthy of praise. Loretta's ability to recognize the suffering of the Albinorics itself tells us a lot about her character, given that most around her would have seen the Albinorics with prejudice and hate. Yet her reason for empathizing with them might be a little closer to home, something we learn from the description of her shield. It reads as follows: Shield of radiant silver, festooned with amber, and carried by Loretta, Knight of the Haligtree. The shape is said to imitate that of a sacred drop of dew, which inspired the absurd rumour that Loretta herself was an Albinoric. So there is a rumour that Loretta herself was an Albinoric, and perhaps there is something to this rumour. You see, there are at least 2 generations of Albinorics, something we learn from the Albinoric Ashes, which names the frog-eyed variants as those of the 2nd generation. Given they are artificial beings, I assume this to mean that the different kinds of albinorics are the result of different procedures or stages in trying to perfect the albinoric formula. This could mean that the female wolf-riding variants could represent a separate generation from the frog-eyed ones. In fact, there is some cut lore that suggests that the female albinorics were a creation of Raya Lucaria, not the Eternal Cities. I have also highlighted in past videos that there clearly was a crossover in culture between the Nox and the Carians. Could the albinorics thus have been a joint enterprise, combining Noxian alchemy with Carian magic? Perhaps then we could suggest that the Carians tried to harness the power of these creations for themselves. We also learn that the female albinorics are not able to use their legs, and this is why they form a close bond with their wolves. They in fact rely upon them for locomotion. Likewise, Loretta is always mounted on her horse, and we never see her walking. It could leave us to question whether she is also a female albinoric who cannot walk. Additionally, these female albinorics are fearsome mounted archers, and Loretta's magic is essentially a giant magic bow, which she fires from atop a mount. That is a lot of coincidence that is starting to pile up. The main argument against this is that Loretta bleeds red, whereas albinorics do actually have white blood. However, this could just be something the devs overlooked, and I would love to hear your thoughts on Loretta's identity. Whether or not she is albinoric makes little difference to me personally. Overall, I see Loretta as a heroic and selfless warrior, someone who made great sacrifices to help a persecuted peoples, and in so doing she gave them hope of a better future. Loretta and Latena's stories are some of the more uplifting ones in Elden Ring, and one that has stayed with me, years after I first experienced it. It is why Loretta's heroic act has earned her my nomination as Elden Ring's most good character. Before I announce who I believe is the most good out of my 6 nominations, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge some honourable mentions who I considered, but didn't quite make the cut for varying reasons. For Demon's Souls, I did consider the Monumental, as this is a character who has performed an extremely long vigil, sacrificing a normal life for the sake of the world, overwatching the fabric of reality itself. From Dark Souls we of course have Solaire of Astora, an honourable, chivalrous knight who best embodies what it means to be a warrior of sunlight, always happy to help in a fight, always trying to uplift and help us however he can, just a good person overall. I had also considered naming Sif, Knight Artorias' canine companion, as my choice, mainly because his long-lasting loyalty is a truly beautiful thing, but I just feel the fair lady wins out, because of the sheer amount of suffering she takes on for others. For Dark Souls 2, I was never really in doubt that I would choose anyone other than the old Ivory King. That said, there are some other great characters here who very much are morally good. There is Alsana, the Ivory King's oracle. As we discussed, she is a fragment of Manus, and she did seek him out initially for her own selfish reasons. Yet she truly became loyal to the Ivory King and his mission, and after he sacrificed himself to the old chaos, there was nothing stopping her from fleeing. Yet she stayed, overcame her true fearful nature, and maintained her watch over the old chaos. Additionally, her main wish is not for herself, but for her lord, as she asks you to release the Ivory King from his current existence, as well as encouraging you to do the same for his knights. Overall, a really brave character, yet one that is just outdone by the Ivory King himself. I didn't really have anyone else in mind for Dark Souls 3, I always knew it would be Yorm, but for Bloodborne I did consider Ariana. Ariana is again just a kind soul, who is always willing to help us out with our blood when we need it. But the Chapel Dweller just is more impactful in terms of what he achieves through his acts of kindness. Finally, for Elden Ring, I was on the verge of choosing Miquella, because, as I have said, I do believe that he gets a far harder time than he deserves, and that ultimately he is a god who did actually want to change things for the better. But when it came down to it, I do feel it would have been too controversial to overlook some of the more dubious acts he committed in achieving his goals. But I am going to be following up this video with one on this very subject, on how I believe Mikola has been a bit unfairly treated, so keep an eye open for that. Fia is another of my favourite characters who I considered. I find her story where she stands up for those who live in death to be a noble one, and to this day, her ending is my favourite. But there are plenty of other good characters in Elden Ring that could easily earn the nomination in my eyes. Millicent, Roderica, and even Dialos, who sacrifices himself for the Living Jar village. There are plenty of heroic characters to choose from in Elden Ring, but on such a subjective matter, you ultimately need to go with your heart, and this is why I chose Loretta. But with that said, let us discuss who I believe is the most morally good character in Soulsborne and Elden Ring. My choice for the most good character in all of Soulsborne and Elden Ring is none other than the Ivory King. I kind of always expected to choose this character as the winner, and after writing the script it just reaffirms my belief that the Ivory King is the closest thing to a moral ideal that we have ever seen in a Souls game. A lot of the characters we have nominated are people who are empathetic, heroic, or they make a personal sacrifice for the sake of others. The reason the Ivory King wins is because he shows all of these qualities and more. He is a great leader, an empathetic person, and is someone who sacrifices himself for the greater good and safety of his people. He is so inspiring that he has gained the loyalty of a fragment of Manus, who has disregarded her very nature in order to carry on the Ivory King's mission. The old Ivory King is just the moral ideal of a good king and hero, and it is a shame that we only get to see him after his fall. Yet it is one of the best things we get to do in any of the Souls games, putting a noble warrior to rest. In our own quest to become the next monarch, the player character should take the lessons of his rule to heart, that being a king isn't about accumulating power, it is about protecting and serving those who call themselves your subjects. So that's it guys, that is my take on who is the most good character in Soulsborne and Elden Ring. But that is just my opinion, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I have really enjoyed this series of videos, and I intend to do more, to make more videos of a discursive nature that look more broadly at the Soulsborne games. I would like to thank you all for watching this video, and for the support of my patrons and members. Until next time folks, I will see you in Eleum Lois. Take care, and have a wonderful evening.